Good morning, everyone who's tuning in. It looks like we have a couple of viewers who are already watching the stream for the MHT Virtual Roadshow this morning. If you'd like, feel free to comment either on Facebook or YouTube, whichever platform you're watching. Comment where you're watching from. If not, that's okay too. We are going to get started here in just a few minutes with the actual presentations. Good morning to everyone who's joining the live stream, either on YouTube or on Facebook. We're going to get started here in just a couple minutes, probably about 10:05. I want to make sure everyone who's joining us has time to find the live stream if they were planning to do so. So we'll get started here in just a few minutes. And if you'd like to comment either on Facebook or YouTube and let us know where you're tuning in from this morning, feel free to do that. And thank you for joining us. We'll get started here in just a minute. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started, at least with a little bit of the housekeeping for the presentations this morning. So my name is Ennis Barbara Smith. I'm one of the assistant administrators for the Maryland Heritage Areas program, and I've got quite a few colleagues joining me this morning from all the different grant programs that MHT administers, who are going to introduce themselves here in just a moment, and some housekeeping for our webinar this morning. We are probably going to address questions at the very end of the webinar. So if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat in either YouTube or Facebook, whichever one you're watching from, and we'll address those questions there at the Q&A session at the end. But we are also recording this webinar. So if it turns out that you can't stay and view this for the whole time, you can always go back and watch the recording later and see the answer to your question that's addressed at the end. And I mentioned we're streaming in two places, Facebook and YouTube, and we're recording this. Keep that in mind when you ask your questions. You don't want to, give any information you wouldn't want recorded in those questions themselves. And let us know if you have feedback on how we're doing this, because this is the first time we're doing something like this, one of these virtual road shows, and first time we're streaming to Facebook in particular. Let's see. So before we get started, I actually want to go around and have myself and my colleagues, I'll turn my camera on and have us introduce ourselves. So let's see, let's start with, on the top of my screen, we have Jen Ruffner. Jen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning, I'm Jen Ruffner, and I am the administrator of the Maryland Heritage Areas Program. Glad to have you here today.
All right, and we've got Heather next on my screen.
Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Barrett. I'm the Administrator of Research and Survey at the Trust, and I'll be speaking today about the non-capital grant program. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. And Andrew? Yep, and Andrew is streaming to YouTube this morning, so they'll be monitoring the questions there. And Nell? I think Nell's unmuting.
Yeah, sorry about that. My screen is a little bit prickly this morning. My name is Nell Zeal. I'm the Chief of the Office of Planning, Education, and Outreach with the Maryland Historical Trust. And today I will be talking about the Certified Local Governments Grants and the program overall, which is a program that I administer.
And we have Steve Allen joining us. I'm not sure if Steve wants to say hi or not. He's not presenting this morning. Oh, there he goes.
Hello. Hi, I'm Steve Allen. I'm just here to watch.
But thank you, Steve. Steve's also with Maryland Historical Trust.
Oh, that's right. Office of Planning, Education, and Outreach.
Yep. Thank you. And Matt McKnight?
Hello, everyone. I'm Matt McKnight. I'm the Chief Archaeologist at MHT. I administer a lot of the non-capital grants, and I'm just here to listen and answer any questions.
Thank you, Matt. And Charlotte Lake.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Charlotte Lake. I am the Capital Grant and Loan Programs Administrator, and I'll be talking today about the Historic Preservation Capital Grant Program and about the African American Heritage Preservation Program.
Wonderful. So thank you all for being with us this morning, and thank you to everyone who's viewing the live streams as well. We are really happy to be able to put this on for you. The idea behind this was, we were doing these road shows in person before the pandemic, and sort of bringing together different programs and different financial incentives that Maryland Historical Trust offers, and doing outreach, explaining what those programs entail. And now we're coming to you in a virtual format, and the idea behind this specific presentation is that we wanted to give you a comparative look at some of the different grant programs that the Maryland Historical Trust and the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority offer. And hopefully this will be a good look at those programs that you see advertised separately, but more of a comparative look so that you can help determine which one of these programs really is, the best fit for your project that you want that you want to get funding for. Or maybe there are multiple grant programs that you'd like to apply for, because there are several of them that are good fits. And so that's what we're hoping that you'll get out of this today. Each of these presentations are going to be about 15 minutes. So just a short overview of the eligibility requirements and the different tips and focuses of each of the grant programs that we have listed here. So first, we're going to hear from myself with the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority, or MHAA grants, our capital and non-capital grants. Then we're going to hear about historic preservation capital grants, followed by the historic preservation non-capital grants. Then we'll hear from the African American Heritage Preservation Program grants, AAHPP. And we'll hear a little bit about the certified local government grants after that. And then we'll have our wrap-up session that I mentioned, which includes a Q&A session, but also a little bit about due dates for the various programs, just an overview of that and how to access our application forms in general. All right, so now we'll start with the presentation again that I'll be doing. Again, my name's Ennis, and I'm one of the assistant administrators with the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority Grants Program. And as you can see here, we offer both capital and non-capital MHAA grants. So first, some background information. What are heritage areas? Well, heritage areas, when we talk about those, some language that we like to use is that heritage areas support the economic well-being of Maryland's communities by preserving and celebrating the state's history, cultural traditions, and natural resources through partnerships that promote, support, and create place-based experiences for visitors and residents alike. And so that's kind of a mouthful, but to pull some language out of this, you know, our focus really is economic well-being, economic development through heritage tourism. And when we talk about place-based experiences, that's often what we're referring to, or another phrase, heritage tourism experiences that our program is promoting and creating through the grants that we fund. And as you can see from the language as well, the grants that we fund, they can have to do with history, with living cultural traditions, or with natural resources. The MHAA program is interested in all of those different types of heritage, and so it's pretty broad in that sense. And some other points we have here on the slide, each of these 13 heritage areas across the state are locally designated and then certified at the state level. And the program in a nutshell is a commitment to economic development through heritage-related tourism. And then you can see our 13 heritage areas there on the map. We also have a link on the slide, which, you know, if you'd like a copy of these slides in a PDF format, I'm sure we can get those to you if you request them, or perhaps we'll have them posted on our website so you can get to these links easily. But this link that we have here is a short tutorial video you can go to and learn how to check and see if you're in one of these heritage areas by putting in your address for your organization or your address for your project that you want to complete. And one other thing to mention that's not on the slide there, but our funding comes from program Open Space for the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. It's about $5.1 million each year. Of course, we don't always know that that's the allocation we're going to get, but for the past couple of years, it's been about that amount. And that money comes from the real estate transfer taxes here in Maryland. So who is eligible to apply for the grants that MHAA offers? Well, for one thing, your project that you want to get funding for needs to be located within the boundaries of one of those heritage areas we just talked about. So that's the first eligibility requirement. Another requirement is your organization needs to be organized in a certain way. You either need to be a nonprofit organization or some type of government entity or government agency, either local government, state, or federal. All of those types of government entities can apply for our grants, and any type of nonprofit, I should say, as well. It doesn't have to be specific. And if you're working towards nonprofit status, you can also work with a financial sponsor, a nonprofit that already exists, to help carry out your program and apply for a grant. That's also possible. You can talk to us about that. So MHAA non-capital grants. As I mentioned, MHAA funds both capital and non-capital grants in the same round every year. And our non-capital grants can fund things like design, interpretation, events, things like festivals, exhibits, brochures, other publications like that, technology, websites or mobile apps, interactive maps. I'm just throwing some others in there, not on the list. Archaeology and other types of research like oral history, pedestrian signage, and then planning for these non-capital projects as well. And with each of those activities that I listed that are fundable, they all need to tie back to heritage tourism, and they all need to tie back, or heritage education, and they all also need to tie back to your local heritage area's goals, which we'll talk a little bit more about. Now, these types of grants, we're accepting requests of $5,000 to up to $50,000 per grant request. For the MHAA capital grants, the types of activities that we tend to fund are property acquisition, development, so that could even be new construction or construction of an addition or a pavilion, rehabilitation or restoration of an existing building, pre-development, so things like architectural drawings or engineers' drawings, the construction or enhancement of trails or trail systems. And again, just like with the non-capital things that we fund, MHAA capital grants also need to tie back to that heritage tourism and education mission. So if you're looking for funding for a building, that building should have a heritage tourism or education use. And all of our projects, because they're state funding, they receive MHT compliance review. Oh, can we go back one slide? Thanks. Sorry about that. They receive MHT compliance review and easement review, all of those projects. And so what that means is MHT compliance is making sure that the project you're proposing will not damage or endanger in any way historic properties or archaeological resources. And so that review process kicks in during our application process. Now, some of the properties that apply for MHAA grants may be required to convey an easement to the Maryland Historical Trust, which would be an agreement between the Maryland Historical Trust and the property owner that MHT will review any changes that the property owner wants to make to the building over the period of years where the easement is in effect. And if you have questions about that, please let us know. That certainly doesn't apply to everyone who applies for and receives a Maryland Heritage Areas grant, but some folks whose properties are really significant would be required to convey an easement to MHT. And again, if you have questions about that, just let us know. Another thing to note is your property does not have to be historic in order to receive an MHAA grant. So you might be applying for new construction, you might be applying for work on a trail. It doesn't have to be designated in any way to receive these capital funds. And MHAA capital grants are minimum of $5,000 as a request and a maximum of $100,000. Next slide. Okay, so some other grant requirements and timeline information about our grants. Both capital and non-capital MHAA grants require a 1-to-1 match of cash or in-kind contributions, any combination of cash and in-kind. So this is a change if you've applied to our program, in a previous year. You might remember that we used to have a certain requirement for how much cash match you had to spend on the project, but now it can be any combination of cash and in-kind. And in-kind match can include volunteer time. Right now, the volunteer rate in Maryland is $29.51 per hour for time spent on your grant project. And in-kind match can also include donated materials or donated services. So depending on what makes sense for your project, the match we hope can be something that's doable because you will be contributing your time, your materials that are donated, et cetera, to the project. And I should back up and say, in general, what match means is that for every dollar of and what one-to-one match means for MHAA, for every dollar of MHAA state grant support, the organization is spending another dollar that's coming from a non-state source on the project as well. And then you're documenting that with your grant reports. So we have some webinars and virtual office hours coming up for our MHAA applicants that are going to be held in January 2020. And we actually have an early bird webinar that's going to be held next week for MHAA. You can look for those on our Facebook page or our Instagram page. And we'll have them up on our website soon as well. And for our round of grants this year, you must submit a short form that's called an intent to apply form by January 29th, 2020. This is literally a couple paragraphs and some contact information. So don't feel like that's, something you're going to have to get everything together by January 29th. What it does is it gives us an idea of the project you're proposing, and then we can give you some feedback, and your local heritage area can give you some feedback as well. And so the final deadlines for full applications for our grant program are then set by each of the local heritage areas, depending on which one you're in, which one your project is in. But those are typically in either late February, March, or April. And for multi-heritage area grant projects, so a project that's going to be taking place across several of the heritage areas, those applications would be due will be due February 26th, 2021. It should say on the slide. So the February 26th that's coming up, that's when those multi-heritage area grants will be due. And that'll give, the different heritage areas all time to review. A couple more tips. Coordinate with your local heritage area director. That's really important. The first step of the review of your grant application will be with your local heritage area. And you want to make sure that the project that you're proposing is meeting their goals. That's one of the requirements. That's one of the first things you should do is get in contact with them. In your application, try to emphasize that you're creating or enhancing a heritage tourism product or heritage education product as well. And you want to discuss your project's impact on the local community and the visitor experience as well. In particular, think about, is your project addressing untold or underrepresented regional history and culture? That's something that MHAA is definitely interested in funding. And project costs that we cannot fund directly with our grant dollars include staff time, marketing, and general operations like utilities and rent, mortgage, that kind of thing. Staff time and marketing, those actually can be part of your cash match though. Next slide. Thank you. And so just some contact information. We're all on the call today. Jennifer Ruffner, the administrator of the program, is with us. Again, my name is Ennis. I'm one of the assistant administrators, and Andrew Arvizu as well. Feel free to reach out to any one of us with questions. And we have also a link to our website, which links directly to all the local heritage areas websites and management plans there on the right-hand side. So that concludes my presentation for the Heritage Areas program, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Lake.
Good morning, everyone. I am filling in today for Barbara Fisher, who administers the Historic Preservation Capital Grant Program. You'll get her contact information at the end of the presentation so that you can jot that down. But I am glad to be here with you today to tell you a little bit about this program. So in a nutshell, this is a historic preservation program focusing on preservation of historic sites, so construction-related projects. And each year, our allocation has been $600,000 since the relaunch of the program in fiscal year 2018. And the maximum grant amount that we award to any given project in a fiscal year is $100,000. We recommend a minimum request of $10,000, but if you have a small project that you're considering undertaking that would be less than that, please do get in touch with us and we can talk about the details and the best way to approach that. Applications will be available in early February. this year, I believe it's February 8th, they'll be available online, and they will be due in mid-March each year. That's our general cycle. And we hold workshops in November and January, and I'll give a little bit more information about that at the end when I get to the contact information. As far as eligibility for the program, the first piece that we need to look at is the property itself and what kind of properties.
That has everything fine at the end. All right. Thanks.
All right. So property eligibility. To participate in this program, the property that's assisted with grant funds needs to be either listed on or eligible for listing on the National Register. If you're not sure whether or not your property is listed, please get in touch with us and we will help you figure that out. And it is a requirement for this program that the property owner conveys a preservation easement to MHT. So as Ennis explained, that is a legal agreement between the property owner and MHT that basically stipulates that work done on the property will be reviewed by MHT to make sure that it meets preservation best practices during the term of that easement. And I also wanted to note that we do have funds available for religious sites and cemeteries, but there are some special requirements related to those types of sites. So if you are thinking of applying for a grant that relates to a religious site that has active worship going on or a cemetery, please get in touch with us before you apply so that we can be sure all of your work is eligible. Next slide, please. As far as who can apply for this program, almost anyone can apply. The only real restriction in this regard is that nonprofit organizations and business entities need to be registered to do business in the state of Maryland. So make sure that if you're planning to apply as one of those two types, you check to be sure that you are registered in Maryland. Otherwise, we also accept applications from local governments, from state and federal agencies who should apply as nonprofits, and from private individuals. The selection criteria for the program do favor nonprofit organizations and local governments, so please keep that in mind. If you are an individual or business entity, I recommend reaching out to us just to talk about your project and make sure that it meets our threshold for public benefit in order to make sure that your project would be competitive. The other piece of interest is that match is not required if you're applying as a nonprofit organization. We do require one-to-one match for all other types of applicants, but if you have a fiscal sponsor that is a nonprofit registered to do business in the state of Maryland, then that would be fine as well, and you would avoid the match requirement. Next slide, please. Eligible projects include acquisition, restoration and rehabilitation, and pre-development, although pre-development is one that is only available for nonprofit and local government applicants. And I'll talk a little bit about each one with some application tips for the different types of work that you might undertake. Next slide, please. So for acquisition, what you really want to think about is, will this protect the property going forward? So the most compelling acquisition proposals tend to be those where something really detrimental to the site is going to happen if you don't acquire it. So essentially you're saving it from development or from being torn down. Those would be the most compelling types of projects related to acquisition. If it's just a transfer in ownership, that's probably not going to be a competitive project. But we have funded a couple of different acquisition projects through this program, so it's certainly possible. Next slide, please. The bulk of projects that are funded through this program relate to rehabilitation or restoration, so essentially work on a historic building. And typically we want to see an emphasis on repair and protection of important original features. And so when I say that, people often think about what you see on the right, something like the decorative elements on the windows at the Heyman Harwood House, but it doesn't have to be something fancy to be historic. There are other examples where we've done work on original wood siding, on roofing, really any element of your building. And you really just want to think about prioritizing what protects the resource, what protects those important historical features of your site. Next slide, please. Pre-development is, as I mentioned, only available to local governments and nonprofit applicants. And it has to be directly related to construction. So we can't fund, for example, research or feasibility plans. But if you need to get architectural drawings or a structural assessment, if you need to do some sort of testing in order to get a permit for building, then those sorts of activities would be eligible. And the other bit that I'd like to mention here is that if you're putting together a proposal, unless this is a really extensive project that you think is going to take $100,000 worth of pre-development, and I'll mention that's very rare that it does, then I highly recommend considering applying both for pre-development work and the first steps that you're pretty sure are going to need to happen. Typically, if you're hiring an architect to do something, you have an idea of what's going to come next. You're hiring someone to do an assessment of the windows and the roof, for example, and you know those pieces are coming next. And so that makes a more compelling proposal. If you can get some of the work done, at least we know that we're working toward protecting your historic resource. Next slide, please. As far as selection criteria go, please see the grant guidelines. They're available on our website that has a complete list of all of the selection criteria in it, but we've pulled out 3 of the top tier items here that are really important to reviewers when they're looking at your application. And so when you're thinking about project design, you want to think about, as I said, prioritizing work that's going to protect your site. So don't ask for interior finishes to be repaired when you know that you have a leaking roof, for example. Really think about that in your project. And when you describe it, start with those really important items first in your description. And for significance, it's not just the historical story of your site, it's the overall story. What does it mean to the local community now? And is there a story there that touches on underrepresented themes or histories in Maryland? We'd love to hear about those. You know your site best. And so there's often a lot that you know about your site and its history and its meaning to the community that at MHT we may be unaware of. So share all of that with us. And then public benefit, again, this is a public program, so we're looking for a really high public benefit to the projects and to the properties. And this specifically relates to how the public learns the story of your site, its importance past and present, but also other ways that you benefit the public you should include in this section. And certainly we want to know how the public accesses your site, and that doesn't just mean when you're open, but also accessibility. How can the entire public access your site? And so I know a lot of groups right now are working on virtual programming, just like we are. And so you're certainly welcome to talk about that. That's another way that many people have been reaching out during the pandemic. So talk about all of those elements and talk about your relationship with the local community, the support they have for you and the support you offer them. Next slide, please. And just to wrap up, as I said, the contact for this program is Barbara Fisher, who is the Capital Grant Administrator at MHT. And you can see the program website listed here. That's where you'll find our grant guidelines and sample answers or sample application questions. We just wrapped up the first round of workshops for next year's grant round. That was in November, but we recorded sessions, and so those are going to be going onto the website. So look there for those recordings. And in January, there will be a few more workshops that you can sign up for. So again, head to the website and you'll get all the information there. And you'll be able to sign up for those and see the workshops that are already recorded. And just as a caveat, the workshops that we should have available on the website in January include our overview. We also did one on general application tips and providing sample answers to our application questions. And then a really great one that we partnered with a couple of different organizations to talk about religious sites and how you might approach preservation and heritage tourism projects at those sites, and another presentation about MHT's easement program with some questions and answers. So hopefully you'll find all of that useful to you. And again, if you have questions about eligibility, the application, the program in general, anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're glad to answer your questions. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Heather Barrett. I co-administer the non-capital grant program with Matt McKnight, who you met earlier. Thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate it. And I'd like to just start with some background for the non-capital program at our peak. We had around $1 million in the 80s and 90s. And then by the early 2000s, our funding had significantly declined. And then in 2012, we did not receive an appropriation. So we were without funds for this program for about 6 years. And then we were thrilled in FY 2018 with an appropriation of $200,000 to basically relaunch this program. The amount of applications that we've received over the last 4 years really underscores the need and demand for this funding. And just to give you an overview with this slide of the program, it's designed for research, survey, planning, and educational activities involving architectural and archaeological resources of the state. And this past year, we've had funding at a level of $300,000, and that was distributed to MHT by the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority Financing Fund. Our maximum requests per project are at $75,000. I will tell you that we have not awarded the top funding level over the past 4 years, but that's not to say that we wouldn't for a stellar project. Next slide. And so nonprofit organizations, and this does include state agencies, may apply, as well as local jurisdictions. Nonprofit organizations must be registered with the State Department of Assessment and Taxation and be in good standing. We also need a letter from the IRS as proof of status. Next slide. Local governments must match the grant dollar for dollar. This could be in cash or in-kind services, a combination thereof. There are no specific percentages for that. No match is required for nonprofit organizations. We have been receiving on average between 25 and 50 applications, so any kind of match would enhance your application. Next slide. So could you go back a couple? Thank you, Jen. The activities that we cover with this program include architectural and archaeological survey work, National Register nominations, HSRs, thematic research working towards historic contexts, preservation plans, and then a variety of education and outreach activities. For a full list of the projects and activities that we fund, please see our guidelines and manual for a detailed list of those. Next slide. We do not fund, capital expenditures, and this means no bricks and mortar projects for us. There are obviously other programs that you've heard about that can fund those types of projects. We do not fund exhibits from existing museum collections, nor projects that seek to conserve or catalog historic collections. There is a caveat for artifacts that you'll hear about in the presentation later. We do not fund previously completed manuscripts, nor projects that are already underway. Next slide. And so we do have a set of program requirements. For architectural and archaeological survey work, you do have to meet our standards and guidelines. You can see the various documents here that are available on our website, so do check those out if you're proposing projects related to survey and documentation. Personnel performing the work must meet the Secretary of Interior's professional qualification standards. That's 36 CFR 61. You can find that document online as well. And you are able to select your consultant and place them in your application. And if you don't do that, you would need to follow a procurement process, basically an RFP process. Next slide. For archaeological investigations that result in the recovery of artifacts, the application must state where and how those artifacts will be cared for. Please consider the MAC lab in St. Leonard, Maryland for those purposes. Next slide. For projects involving one resource, that resource must either be listed in the National Register or determined eligible for listing. For projects involving GIS or spatial data, we'll need to receive those files as deliverables. We do not require an easement for our program. Next slide. So over the last 4 years, we have had a set of priorities, funding priorities, and these are focused on research and survey projects, simply because we have not had the funding in quite a while. So basically, we're wanting to restart and re-engage in our survey programs. So we're looking at broad-based, comprehensive architectural and archaeological survey work, projects designed to assess, document, and address the impacts of natural disasters or ongoing natural processes like sea level rise, or those projects that undertake detailed, in-depth studies, whether that's for a specific time period or a property type. Next slide. And I wanted to just highlight a couple of projects that I should say several projects that we've funded over the last 4 years. And this is just a way of hopefully giving you an insight in the projects that we are funding. So Preservation Maryland came in for a project documenting the women's suffrage movement. And this was an educational outreach project that was related and documented the anniversary, the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. The work built upon a historic context that MHT had developed that through a graduate intern. And then it also complements an ongoing project of ours funded through an underrepresented community grant for site-specific documentation related to the suffrage movement. Next slide. We funded recently St. Mary's College, and they were doing a documentation project for domestic outbuildings in Southern Maryland. So they were covering 4 different counties: Prince George's County, Calvert, Charles, and St. Mary's County. And well-known architectural historian Willie Graham completed this work that included digital photography, measured drawings, and narrative essays on each of these outbuildings and properties. Next slide. We fund typically both architecture and archaeology, and here's an archaeology project that was a survey, geophysical survey, used to locate the 1634 palisaded fort of the first European settlers in St. Mary's City. They had identified 2 probable sites that they were doing the survey work on. Next slide. Here's another archaeological project focused at Rogers Tavern in the town of Perryville. They were doing a non-invasive survey around the tavern building and at the Lower Ferry Park. Next slide. And this is the last project that I'll highlight. This was the Lower Eastern Shore Threatened Sites Survey. The Somerset County Trust came in for this work. And this was a survey that focused on documentation in Somerset and Dorchester counties. And the completion, the consultant prepared Maryland inventory forms. And we funded this over the last 3 years. And by the time that we're done, we'll have 150 about Maryland inventory forms. So that's really a wonderful enhancement to our survey work. Next slide. So this is the tentative grant schedule for the upcoming year. In May, we usually put out the announcement of funds. In May and June, we hold workshops. An intent to apply, we also use that abbreviated form, would be due in July sometime. And then we're looking at around an August 1st deadline for the completion of the full application. Check back with us in May for the firm details on this next grant round. Next slide. So we have a variety of handouts that are available on our website. There is a new grants guidelines and manual, so be sure to check that out. That will give you the selection criteria, the items that we look for in the review and ranking process. There's an online quick start guide available that discusses the online submittal process and gives you some tips for that. We also have a sample intent to apply form and a sample application that will show you each area of focus that we look at, whether it's significance, the urgency, the window of opportunity for your project. So take a look at those. Both the intent and the full application are submitted through our online system. Next slide. And so here's contact information. If you have general questions, you can reach out to Karen Golder. For architectural projects, please reach out to me for specific scope questions, and then Matt Knight for archaeology. And with that, thank you for your attention, and I'll turn it over to Nell, I believe. Oops, nope. Turn it back over to Charlotte.
Hi again, everyone. Right now, I'm going to talk about the African American Heritage Preservation Program. This program is a partnership, is administered as a partnership between the Maryland Historical Trust and the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. So I'm going to give you two contacts at the end, depending on the type of question that you have, because we each have different roles to play within this program. And if you're not sure, don't worry, you can get in touch with me and I'll point you in the right direction if necessary. Overall, this is another capital program, and it is focused on construction-related projects, just like the other program that I spoke about earlier. However, in this case, it focuses on sites that relate either to African American history or something that maybe historically doesn't relate to African American culture in Maryland, but is going to, so it's going to be converted to a new purpose. And an easement may be required for some of these projects. Overall, the program allocation historically has been $1 million per year. We're now entering our 10th year of grants for this program, and it's been the same, so hopefully that will continue into the future. The maximum grant amount is $100,000 per year per organization, and we again request a minimum of $10,000, but if you have a smaller project, reach out to me, please, and we'll talk about the details and if we can make that work. Applications are due July 1st every year, and this means that we offer workshops and the application goes live generally in April before applications are due. As far as eligibility, much like the Historic Preservation Capital Grant Program that I spoke about earlier, almost anyone can apply for this particular program. Nonprofits and businesses do need to be registered to do business in the state of Maryland in order to apply. And just like that other program I spoke about, nonprofits are not required to provide match, but everyone else must provide one-to-one matching funds for any grant funds received. Next slide, please. Eligible projects can include acquisition, rehabilitation, new construction, or pre-development. So acquisition would need to either preserve a site that is historically related to an African American community or is going to be converted to a use of that nature, so some sort of museum, for example. Likewise, new construction, if you are going to build something to be a museum, that would be fine as well. Rehabilitation is essentially construction on an existing building, and this can relate either to a site that is historically associated with the African American community locally or is an existing building that you're going to convert. And pre-development, like the other program that I spoke about earlier, needs to relate directly to a construction project. So again, no research or feasibility studies or master plans, but if you need to do a historic structures report to determine what work needs to be done first, or you need an architect to put together construction documents for you or a structural analysis, all of those would be eligible expenses. If you're in doubt, please get in touch with me and I can help you figure out what sorts of activities would be eligible as a project through this program. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea of the types of projects that we've done, I know that we have funded a lot of projects involving historic African-American schools and historic African-American churches, and so that's often what people think about first when they think of this program, but the Commission is very interested in reaching out to different property types and different types of projects. So if you have something that might seem a little unique or off the beaten path, that's totally fine. Please get in touch with us and submit an application. These are just some examples of projects that have been funded in the past, and they include, as you see, a historic African-American school on the top left, as well as a historic African-American church on the bottom right. But there is also a cemetery project that is currently underway, almost complete, that involved repair of grave markers and also the fabrication and installation of permanent interpretive signs about the cemetery and its history. You also see on the top right the Jane Gates Heritage House, which is a house that was historically owned by an African-American woman, and it is currently being converted into a community center and archival space. On the bottom left, you see a historic bowling alley that is on the ground floor of an African-American church, and that was a surprise. We didn't know that was down there, but surprise, here's a historic bowling alley. So again, as I said, unique projects are certainly welcome. In the center on the bottom, you see the swimming pool at the Robert W. Johnson Community Center in Hagerstown. That project is going to hopefully be underway in the spring when weather permits that type of work. But this was, for a very long time, the only pool in Hagerstown that African Americans could attend. And recently it has needed some repairs and hasn't been open to the public. And so this project is going to remedy that so that it can once again be open to the public. So you can see this is a really wide range of types of projects. So don't be daunted if you don't think you have the typical site. There are lots of options, and we're definitely glad to hear about them and consider them for funding. Next slide, please. So just a few tips on approaching your application. When you get ready to describe the project that you'd like to have funded, make sure that you're very clear about what you're asking for grant funds for, and then consider that the reviewers aren't all architects or historic preservationists. They come from a really wide array of backgrounds, and so you want to describe your construction project in terms that the layperson can understand, not in really detailed technical terminology. Make sure that it's understandable to, say, anyone in your organization, and that way it paints a clear picture for reviewers. You want to make sure that all of your expenses are eligible. And again, you can reach out to me if you're not sure, but definitely check our grant guidelines on the website. There is a really long list there of what's eligible, what's not. But if you are thinking of doing something and you can't find it on that list, get in touch with me and I will confirm for you one way or the other. Photos can also be really helpful for reviewers in understanding your project and making sure that the work that you're proposing is eligible. You see on this slide the Emmanuel Episcopal Church in Cumberland. Beneath this church are tunnels and archaeological remains from Fort Cumberland, and they were used as part of the Underground Railroad network. And so we actually have a project that is involving those tunnels. So the photo of the site lets us know where it is, but then we also need some detailed photos inside that give us an idea of where the project is actually going to be taking place. Next slide, please. Site significance is also another really important section of the application, and this relates both to the history of your site and to the importance of your site to the community now. And so this is really your chance to tell the story of your site and your organization and let us know what's unique about you, what's your passion, what's your mission, and how does your site relate to that. Next slide, please. Public benefit. So a lot of applicants have ways that they reach out and do work in the community, and it's great to describe that. But one of the important elements that the Commission is looking for when evaluating applications is how your site increases public knowledge of Maryland's African American history and culture. And so think about what sorts of educational programming you may have, or if you interface with a local historical society, whatever that may be. It takes many different forms. The example that you see here is a church in Dorchester County that conducted an archaeological dig, learned a lot about the history of the site and the community, and then put that in a permanent sign that's out front. So anyone who's walking by on the street can learn something about the history of the church and of the community. And so this is just one example of something that you might do, but you may have ways that you tell that story to the public that you may not even think about because it's just always there in the background for you. But be sure to share that information in your application. Next slide, please. And finally, a bit of contact information. At the top, you see the program webpage. There are two primary contacts for this program. As I said, it's a partnership between the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture and the Maryland Historical Trust. And so there's a contact with each of those agencies, depending on what type of question you have. Chanel Compton is the executive director of the commission, and you have her email address there. If you have questions about the purpose of your project or what program funding priorities are, if you have questions about developing your historical narrative and talking about the significance of your site, please reach out to Chanel and she will be glad to help you with guidance on those types of questions. And then the other contact with MHT is me, Charlotte Lake. And if you have questions about eligibility, if you have questions about your construction project or technical preservation issues, or you have questions about the application and application system, I'm the person that you should reach out to. And again, you can reach out to either one of us and we'll point you in the right direction if it's an answer that we don't have for you, but those are the basic breakdowns. Thank you for joining us today. And I am now going to turn this over to the next speaker.
Good morning again, everyone. My name is Nell Zeal. I'm the Chief of the Office of of Planning, Education, Outreach for the Maryland Historical Trust, and I administer the Certified Local Government Program. This program is a little bit different from some of the other programs that are presented today in that you have to have gone through a certification process in order to apply for these grants. And you have to be a local government. So I am going to spend some time talking about the program itself in case there are folks listening who are interested in becoming certified in order to apply for these grants, and then give a quick overview of the kinds of grants that we fund, which is the primary benefit of certification and participating in this program. So to start, it's helpful to understand that the Maryland Historical Trust is the state historic preservation office for Maryland. Every state has one. Every tribal government has one as well. So we are part of a national network that partners with the federal government through the National Park Service on a variety of programs. Those programs are outlined in the National Historic Preservation Act. And they are supported by federal funding, which again comes through the National Park Service in an annual allocation for each state historic preservation office that participates in that network. So some of our federal programs include Project Review and Compliance, which you've heard about in some of the other presentations. The National Register of Historic Places is a list of significant historic properties that is maintained by the National Park Service, although we, as the State Historic Preservation Office, we have a role in that. That is something that some of the other programs mentioned as a threshold requirement for participation in their program. So in that way, the federal and state roles of the Maryland Historical Trust are related and reinforce each other. Another important federal role for us is through the Certified Local Government Program. You chase slides? Thank you. So really this is a federal, state, and local partnership. We receive money from the National Park Service every year. We are obligated to give 10% of our federal funding to local jurisdictions. So that can be counties and also municipalities that have made a special commitment to historic preservation. And there are a number of requirements in order to meet that threshold criteria for certification. Basically, it's making sure that Local ordinances are in line with the state enabling legislation, that your policies observe best practices for historic preservation, that your historic preservation commissions meet certain characteristics. And I would be happy to talk to anyone about that who's interested. Right now, we have 22 counties and municipalities that are certified through the program. Change slides. So some of the requirements for participation once you've gone through the certification process, and the certification itself can be a lengthy process because it does mean in some cases that you have to update your policies, regulations, procedures in order to meet the requirements of the program. Once you're certified, you just need to maintain your adherence to the standards of the program. Each of your historic preservation commissioners should receive annual training. We also encourage that historic preservation staff receive annual training. Each local government needs to submit an annual report, which we've tried to make as brief and painless as possible, but allows us to collect some baseline data on each of the local governments every year. And then you'll need to undertake a 4-year evaluation. So that's basically a meeting with me and occasionally with the Maryland Association of Historic District Commissions, which I'll talk about a little bit later, to talk about any struggles, challenges that you're having, anything that needs to be corrected in order to bring you back online for the program standards. So it's supposed to be a healthy exchange more than an audit. It's something that we view as being supportive to the local governments, and so far that's working pretty well. In terms of benefits of the program, why would you want to participate in this network? You do get special access to education and training opportunities. There is an educational set aside every year for participating local governments. So all you have to do is just fill out a 1-page application online saying that you would like to have money set aside for training, and we do that for you. It's usually about $1,000 per local government every year, sometimes more depending on the educational opportunities that are available that year. And then we also have competitive project grants, which we'll talk about in a little more detail. Next slide. So the grant program, as I mentioned, is split between these two components. The educational grants are non-competitive, and we host those in partnership with the Maryland Association of Historic District Commissions, which is a statewide nonprofit dedicated to supporting local governments in historic preservation planning. MAHDC holds on to the educational funds for us, and frequently they are the ones who provide the training for the local governments, sometimes in partnership with us. So that tends to make it easier for everyone involved. And if anyone has any questions about the educational grants, I'm happy to answer those. But we tend to be pretty open to what kinds of education the commission wants. In some cases, it's very specific architectural history preservation or windows preservation, hands-on workshops and things like that certainly qualify, but so do programs for laws and procedures and some of the administrative duties of the commissions. Project grants are competitive. Overall for the program, we have about $80,000 per year. For the educational grants, we typically set aside about $10,000, which will leave about $70,000 for competitive project grants. These are non-capital grants, and you've heard about what that means from a number of the programs previously, but we fund planning, education, research and survey. We can also fund heritage tourism projects. We have a $25,000 maximum grant. Occasionally we give grants that large. Usually they end up being in the $10,000 to $15,000 range. Cash match is encouraged but not required for this program. And we hold rounds in February every year. So the real benefit of this program for local governments is that it puts you into a much less competitive pool. You're only competing against a maximum of 21 other certified local governments to compete for these project grants. But the CLG program does fund, in terms of eligibility, funds projects that are very similar to our historic preservation non-capital grant program and also to the MHAA non-capital grants. So you can learn more about the program by going to our website. You're also welcome to contact me directly by email, and I would be happy to answer any questions you have. Thanks.
Thank you, Nell, and thank you to all of our presenters today. And I just want to apologize again for the technical difficulties we had with Facebook Live. Hopefully we'll get those worked out and be able to do that in the future. But hopefully everyone who's listening now is listening on the YouTube link where you can hear all the presenters. I've posted that in the comments on Facebook, so you should be able to click that there if you're during the question and answer session, because you do want to make sure you can hear from everyone. Everyone will be answering questions. All right, so first of all, we're going to do the wrap up. That we're going to do a due dates overview of when the different due dates are for these grant programs. So coming up this year, the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority MHAA grants that I talked about, capital and non-capital. Our intent to apply form is due January the 29th, 2021. And then our full applications are due according to the local heritage area deadlines in February, March, and April of 2021. For the certified local government grants, they just require a full application. It's a one-step application, and those are typically due in February. For historic preservation capital grants, the full applications this year for those grants will be due March 22nd, 2021, and that's also a one-step application process. It's the same as well. It's a one-step for the African American Heritage Preservation Program, AAHPP grants, and their full applications will be due typically in July. They haven't set a specific deadline quite yet, but this will hopefully help you plan. And the historic preservation non-capital grants, which they do have an intent to apply a two-step application process like MHAA, and their intent to apply forms are typically due in July, with the full applications then due in August. So that gives you an overview if you're planning to apply for multiple programs, when to expect those applications to be due. And I just want to go over a couple slides before we get to the questions and answers about how to access our applications in general. So you want to go to MHT.Maryland, spelled out, .gov, and you want to click on the funding tab there at the top of our homepage. And then once you've clicked on the funding page, you will see this page that brings you to a page with grants, tax credits, and more, and you want to click on grants, the button for grants there at the bottom. And then once you're on the general grants page, you'll see a list of any open funding opportunities, ones that are accepting applications right now. It'll look similar to this screenshot we have on the slide, and you'll see language that says something like to begin a new intent to apply form or to begin a new application for such and such program, click here. And that's where you click to start a new application for that particular grant opportunity. Now, if you have already started an application and you want to go back and edit that application that you had saved your work on, you don't want to click that button to start a new application again. Instead, you want to go to My Grant Account, which is a button that you should be able to see on multiple pages, including the grants page on MHT's website. And you click on that My Grant Account button to get into your account to access your saved applications. And once you're in your account, you want to make sure that you log in using the same email address that you used to set it up and that'll make sure that you're in the right place. And then you'll be able to see all the applications associated with that account that you've started, and even applications you've submitted as well, if you change the view. And so if you want to continue working on one, you would just click on that application title. And that's also how you can check and make sure that you're filling out the correct application, because we know sometimes there's some confusion, for example, between the MHAA grants, our capital grants, and the Historic Preservation Capital grants, which have some overlap. We'll talk a little bit more about, but sometimes there's confusion. This is where you can make sure you're filling out the correct application as well, because the application name will say so. It will say either MHAA or Historic Preservation. And you may have to change the show menu on the right side of your screen. If you're not seeing the application that you saved immediately, it might be that your show menu here is set to new applications, or it's set to submitted applications. In order to see one that you have started work on, you probably want to have in progress applications selected there. All right, and we're going to now get to the question and answer session. I have a couple of questions that we've drafted for the group to get us started, and then we're going to see if we have any questions on the streams as well. So the first question for the panel, and I would invite my other panelists as you're answering, if you'd like to turn your microphones on and turn your cameras on, that's great. And if you're having trouble hearing the panelists besides myself, make sure you go to the YouTube link so you can hear them, because we're having some trouble with that on Facebook. First question: what makes your grant program different from the others discussed today? And so this is just meant to be comparative. We can all sort of summarize, this is what makes my grant program unique, and compare it. Can I get someone to start with an answer?
Sure, Ennis, I'll go ahead and start if that's all right.
Thank you.
So since I talked about two different programs today, I'll do both of them right now, and I will start with the Historic Preservation Capital Grant Program. And this is really a program that focuses on construction projects that are historic preservation projects. And so we're looking specifically at historic sites and specifically at preservation of those sites. And for the African American Heritage Preservation Program, it too is a capital program, so construction related, but in this case, it focuses on sites that are related to African American history and culture, and may involve new construction and heritage tourism. So a little more of a hybrid than some of the other programs, I guess.
Ennis, I can go next.
Thank you, Heather.
Hi again, everyone. I think our uniqueness is, well, for one thing, we're not a capital program, so these are non-capital grants, but the focus in our special priority areas of research and survey projects for both architecture and archaeology, I think make us a little bit different than the other grants that you've heard about today. Thanks.
Thank you, Heather.
And I can go next. The Certified Local Government Program is different in that only local governments who have gone through a certification process are eligible to apply. We also, in terms of priorities, even though we fund a lot of the same kinds of non-capital projects as the other programs, we are one of the only places where you can come for local government planning grants or publications and projects to support local government planning, like design guidelines and things like that, which really aren't as appealing in terms of ranking in some of the other programs. So if you're interested in doing that work, definitely consider the CLG program.
Great. And I would say for the Maryland Heritage Areas program, and Jen and Andrew, please feel free to chime in on this. A couple things about our program is we fund capital and non-capital grants together in the same round. And so both of those different types. The properties certainly don't have to be listed on the National Register or eligible for National Register listing to receive funding. And the heritage tourism focus is a big deal for our program. And you do need to be located within the boundaries of one of those heritage areas, which is different from all the other programs. And for us, and I should say there's some overlap with some of the other programs that have heritage tourism components too, but heritage tourism is the main focus for the heritage areas program. And the other thing that makes us different is the role of the local heritage areas. So each of the local heritage areas has, a director and staff that are there as resources for you when you're completing your grant application. And there's a local review process before the state level review for these grants. So that's something that's different as well. All right, so let's jump to the next question. Are organizations eligible to apply to multiple grant programs for the same project? And I can go ahead and answer that. Yes, you are eligible to apply for multiple of these grant programs for the same project. And some caveats, of course, you can apply for anything that you're eligible for, but you may want to talk with, or you should talk with, the staff members that are administering these different grant programs and try to figure out what's the best fit. But you're more than welcome to apply for one. And I think we have for more than one. And I think we have a follow-up question to that that both Dr. Charlotte Lake, and I and MHA can address. What specific advice do you have for applicants planning to apply for the Historic Preservation Capital and the MHAA grant programs simultaneously? So these programs are open around the same time each year, and they do have some overlap in what's eligible for funding as far as the project types that we fund. So sometimes there's confusion about this and we get questions. So what advice do we have for people who are in that position? And I think I'll ask Charlotte to start if she'd like.
Sure, I'd be glad to do that. So the reason that we decided to focus on these two programs is, as Anna said, they have applications open at about the same time, and there is some overlap in the types of projects that could be undertaken. And so with the others, usually you're going to know the result of one round, so you'll know if you got funded or if you can ask for, say, funds for a next step in your project, something like that. And so for these two, you're applying at the same time, essentially. And so you might not know the result, or you won't know the result until you've applied to both. And so that makes it a little trickier. And so it's still best to try to think about discrete areas of your project that you could apply to each program for. So if you have a larger project that's going on, and we're specifically talking about MHAA capital grants here, obviously, because they're going to overlap with historic preservation capital grants. So those would be the only overlap areas would be for construction related projects. So if you have a large construction project going on, and you know, for example, that you need to work on the roof, and you need to work on the windows, and you need to build a stage. Well, some aspects of that might not even be eligible for the Historic Preservation Capital Grant Program, and so you wouldn't be able to apply. And others might be a higher priority for one program or the other. And so that's really why it's best to reach out to contacts from both programs to make sure that you're getting the best advice about which component to put in your application for each program. Now, there are some that might be equally competitive in both programs, and maybe it's a really high priority for your organization. And so you want to go ahead and hedge your bets and apply for both for the same piece, because, I can't do anything else until I get that leaking roof fixed. It's, destroying my exhibits, and it's damaging the building. So we really need to get that taken care of first. So we're just going to see, can we get funding for that? And that's totally fine if that is how you would like to approach the project. But if you've got multiple things you need to do, then it's great to split them up. And as I said, it's really best to get in touch with contacts for both programs to sort of split those proposals out, or figure out what the best way is to describe your project so that you cover the most aspects possible and have the greatest likelihood of getting funded. What is most competitive for each program? It is going to seem like a similar application process because it's through the same application portal, and some of the questions that we ask are the same because for legal requirements, we have to ask those questions. And so we understand that that can be a little bit confusing, and we're here to help.
Yes, definitely. And each of the programs, I'll add, I think Charlotte summarized everything really well. Each of the programs has, their own review process and priorities. So even if you get advice from staff to apply for both, your project may be received differently by the two different sets of reviewers, and that's something that we can give advice on to an extent, but they're both competitive programs, and we're never going to know, oh, for sure, this will get funded in this one or the other. So we'll give you the best advice that we can. And I agree with Charlotte. That's the first step, is reaching out to staff from both programs to talk with us about which component should you apply to for both. And then I like to say the worst case scenario, which isn't a worst case scenario really, is you get money from both programs for the same work, and then you might either have to work with staff and figure out if we can still fund different aspects and shift things around a little, or if you have to decline one of the awards. And that you would be so lucky to get both of them. So just because they are very, very competitive. Anything I'm leaving out, or Jen and Andrew, anything you want to add about advice for people in this position before we move on to the other questions? Okay. So I'm going to check on Facebook. I didn't see any questions besides our technical difficulties when I looked last. Andrew, are there questions on YouTube coming in? All right. Well, one second here. I'm not seeing any questions on Facebook either. Do any of my other presenters, have anything you think would be useful advice? If not, we can get ready to wrap up as well. All right. Well, if you think of other questions that you have for us, again, I just want to emphasize, thank you for tuning in this morning to watch the stream, or for watching the recording later. We really appreciate all of you, giving your time to learn about these grant programs. And I really appreciate all my presenters for giving their time to speak about the different grant programs. If you have more questions for us, we have on the slide here that you should go to our main grants page and scroll down to where all the different programs are listed. And then that's a good starting place for each program for getting to our contact information and getting to the specifics. And thank you again. This was new for us. Please let us know how we did. We know we need to work on the Facebook Live audio for next time. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.